Welcome back to another Performance Matters podcast series. Bob Mosher here. We are very excited about this next episode because the nature of our world as L&D professionals is changing. Our roles are growing. Our influence is expanding. AI is doing some remarkable things in our ability to get product out the door and step into brand new roles around impact and measurement that we've never been able to enter before. So this time we're so excited to be joined by Joe Dunlap, a really wonderful advocate of the 5 moments and workflow learning, who's going to share his story and journey in getting here and the impact on the new roles he's seeing within his organization. Give a listen, friends. All right, friends, welcome back to our 5th episode of Performance Matters for 2026. Go back and check in, and we're over at 80 now. My gosh, since starting this. So appreciate all you tuning in. What a wild, wild west we live in. And so much of this year, as you can imagine, has pivoted on AI and its relationship. And I believe, and I think my guest does as well, the wonderful opportunity it has for us as L&D professionals to pull us into places that we've coveted, wanted to be, and other things. And we hope those who've been listening are getting the same excitement. Today, I'm honored to have a gentleman I've known for 20 years. We talked about this in the pre-setup. Joe Dunlap, a dear friend, admired his work, a remarkable student, practitioner, and advocate of the methodology. Joe, welcome. Great to have you here.
Bob, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to be here.
All right, buddy. So let's dig in, friend, right? We always start these off because context is king, workflow learning, right? And I don't like to read bios, and it kind of segues into our theme right here. And by the way, those who are listening, if you've not read Joe's posts on LinkedIn and his series around not just what we're going to talk about today, but his journey through this, it is just wonderful and practical, pragmatic. He's a practitioner. I highly recommend you go and check those out and friend him on LinkedIn. Joe, tell us your journey. How did you get here? How has this become important? And that will lead us into this wonderful area around a performance architect. We'll talk
Absolutely.
about.
So I've been in learning development for 25 years, over 25 years now. And I started off like most of your audience. I started off as an instructional designer. I got into the e-learning space when that was relatively new in learning management systems. And then around about 2006, I got introduced to your 5 moments of need. And that started my transition away from a focus on formal learning, recognizing that we weren't quite hitting the marks that we needed to improve organizational results. And then that journey from there has been an uphill battle. And you know this very well. There's always a lot of resistance with regards to addressing performance issues, but I've been persistent in continuing that fight of no, we're not getting to the underlying root causes and the problems that are there, and has led me all the way to where I am at now, which is the head of learning and development or continuous learning performance improvement with the CJK group, where I finally get the opportunity to really address what makes performance matter. And so I've gotten a lot of good reception with our chief executive officer as well as our other C-suite personnel, and they have embraced what it is that I'm bringing to the table with regards to the 5 moments in the enable methodology.
Love that. And I'm so glad that you've landed where you have, friend. We've had conversations over the years, right? So let's talk about this. Let's peel the onion back by layers, right? And this mindset shift we talk about all the time, right? And so And for me, like anything, when I'm in front of groups and they say, what's some of the biggest obstacles to making this journey? Especially if it's L&D, I'm like, friends, it's you people.
Yeah.
Because if you don't leave this or go back or embrace this and think this is the North Star, you never get there, right? Because you got to bring sometimes a misinformed and even begrudging group along, right? So help us with that mindset shift for you from one of learning delivery to this performance consulting area we're talking about.
Yeah, and I think it could be kind of summed up by that nasty little word, assume, right? So we know what happens when we assume. And I think there are so many people within our industry, and I was one of them, that we assume that learning improves performance, even though that there is ample research out there to the contrary of that. The other assumption, and this really came on to me the past 2 years in working with other leaders who happen to be in the manufacturing industry and in the learning space, is that we assume that there's a performance architecture, my words, that exists within our organizations that help us build the learning. And so I started doing some homework on this over the past year. And while the science is still a little shaky around all this, what I've come to learn is less than 5% of organizations globally actually have a performance architecture in place that defines your workflows, your role responsibilities, performance metrics. So
Isn't that
If you
amazing?
think about that and you step back, you're going, okay, well, what are you building learning to if you're not in one of those organizations? Because it becomes the false narrative. You think you're building learning to something that actually doesn't have something substantial behind it.
I'm sighing because, that percentage should terrify us, right? I
It,
mean,
it,
we
it sh-
always wonder why we're the first to get cut or we're not a seat at the table or we're order takers. So I've heard those ad nauseum
yeah,
and right. And it's, well, if you don't have a target to shoot at
yeah,
in the first place, right? And we're not helping with that. Well, of course we find ourselves where we are,
yeah.
RWA changed my life, Joe, when I first saw
Hmm.
it, right? And I can't tell you how many times I've done one when at the end, the business person in the room,
Yeah,
sometimes it's me, goes, I don't know. This has been really remarkable. I know you learning people are going to do whatever you do with this next, but I just got to tell you, for me, it's the first time I've ever known what we did here. It's
yeah,
the first time someone ever helped walk my organization through
yeah,
what is our performance architecture here.
yeah,
What is the work we really do? What is
yeah,
are the true workflows? That is a remarkable gift to give, and I think it changes the narrative. So in your article, friend, I want to
yeah,
dig here because this is everyone's struggling with roles right now,
yeah,
right? What will the ID be next, if they're even called that? In our enable methodology, what is the EN about engage? What is the E about evaluate?
yeah.
How do we get there? You outline roles
I
of a
did.
performance consultant,
I did.
workflow designer. It's part of your article. You give us an overview of four,
Yeah.
right? Would you mind dissecting those? Because I'm a big guy around labels, role clarity. And I love the way you've architected this. Would you mind taking us through those in in this area?
Absolutely. And it kind of all started once we started understanding the truth of there wasn't a performance architecture. And for us,
Mhm.
the impetus was we were going through ISO certification.
Mhm.
So once you start to uncover the roles, you start to realize there wasn't much there that we had to build that out. So we kind of stepped away from the learning mindset at that point because it wasn't about building a course or anything like that. Is we need to understand this entire role, its workflow and everything else in order to meet that certification. So it happened to us by necessity more than anything. But as we were going through it, we started to define these roles. And one was that performance consultant role. So that was the first and primary. And that's the person who actually clarifies what good performance looks like. So, by role, by outcome. And I want to distinguish that part is that you could have similar titled roles within an organization who have
Mhm.
much different responsibilities. And like for instance, and one of the things that has kind of always bothered me about the skills conversation is you're lumping everybody into the same boat. And that's
Mhm.
not it. Work context matters. So that's where the performance consultant comes in, is that they're understanding that role within that work performance context. What technology, what processes, what things are they actually doing? And they're working with that leader to diagnose how performance varies in that work, decide whether learning is even appropriate. And then if it is, then that's where the workflow designer or the process analyst comes in, because their job is focused on how does work actually get done? What technology are you using? What processes are you following? And things like that. And so they're mapping the real workflows, the identity decision points, and they're embedding guidance when people struggle. And their goal is to make performance easier without requiring people to stop and learn. The capability coach, and this is where you and I have had a couple conversations, is that's where the pain point is that when that person is actually applying, who's
Mhm.
there supporting them? Manager or supervisor, whoever it may be. So that's where the capability performance coach comes in, is their job is to now train up that support system that exists, the human support system that exists around that individual who's applying that knowledge, that learning in the moment of need. So that is their job. And then behind it all, is that whole idea of a data and quality lead that we define what the performance metrics are. Their job is now to assess, are we actually hitting those metrics
Mm.
in relationship to the business goals and measurements?
So, give us the roles again in order.
Yeah, absolutely. So first and foremost, the performance consultant, you got to have the person who's talking to those leaders to understand what good looks like. Then if they're when they're and there's always something to be built for one of the five moments, no matter
Sure.
what. That's where the workforce flow designer, performance architect comes in, or process analyst, I should say, comes in, is understanding that workflow, the technologies, the processes that are used. What is the most optimal delivery of information that you can choose? Is it a job aid? Is it an SOP? Whatever it may be, that is their role. When they've done that, then that's where the capability performance coach comes in, is understanding now how information is being delivered within the workflow. How do you now make sure that there's support of that from the human side? So that may be the manager or the supervisor. And the data and quality lead is basically the feedback loop saying, okay, here's what I see going well. Here's what's not going well. We're going to have to make some changes with regards to all that. So that's the person that keeps everybody else honest.
Brilliant. Do you see folks wearing multiple hats?
I absolutely do. I think it's a necessity now. When we talk about the use of AI or the skills framework conversation or something like that, it's no longer just about the way that we were, which is formal learning. It's really, you have to be in all of those spaces of the 5 moments and the enable methodology. And to do that, you have to wear different hats. It can't be just the learning only mindset anymore.
So skills. So glad you brought that up, buddy. I mean, I went through, I did the competency modeling, you know,
Yeah,
thing, and my interpretation of this next iteration of what in many ways I think is that we just don't go deep enough. A skill is defined by context,
correct.
right? And if you stop at the skill level, the competency model, the role across the organization level,
Yeah.
you don't get down to application. You don't get down to context, right?
And that is absolutely what's saying. I was actually at a little gathering, ATD down in Chicago here not too long ago, and somebody from Allstate was presenting their skills framework. And I asked that same question.
Mhm.
How are you getting down to this level? And it was nothing but crickets, Bob. Like, you
Right.
thought that I dropped a bomb in the room, and it wasn't my intent to upset
No.
the story. It was, you've just thrown a bunch of skills into a definition or into a framework, and you say, well, here's what you have. Okay, but what does that mean?
Yep.
I could throw those skills on my resume, but that's not in the context of my work, you know?
Correct.
So
Correct. Brilliant.
yeah,
Brilliant. So, friend, 5 moments. You brought it up.
yeah,
The lens of 5 moment.
yeah,
Help us bring some context to that. How is the enable methodology or the methodology sat for you within these roles or within
yeah,
the work that you've done? What
yeah.
resonates and kind of brings it together from a methodological? Did I say that right?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So everything that I've built has been on the 5 moments, right? So that's been my life for the last 15, 20 years now.
Hmm.
So when we built those roles, it was with the 5 moments in mind. And the 5 moments of need are really just, it's powerful because they force a different question. What does
Mm,
someone need at the moment performance breaks down? And that has been, especially in the manufacturing industry, that
yeah.
usually is the pain point when performance breaks down for whatever reason that may be. Most of the traditional L&D work kind of clusters around new and more, and it's all
Mm,
comfortable, great. But the performance gaps don't usually show right there. They're going to usually live in apply, solve, and change, and that's where the work is being done, and that's where the gap exists, and that's where certainly our gap exists. Is we didn't have anything in that space because nobody had defined the performance architecture. So when I think
mm,
about, for instance, the enable methodology, it separates learning from performance support. It pushes guidance into the workflow. It makes decision support visible at that moment of need. And as an example of how I get to tell that story to our chief executive is I get to say, here are the resources that our operators are hitting when they're on a job. So I can actually determine, based on the data that we have, I can tell them what project they were working on, what role they were
yep.
in, what resources they were hitting, and what were the end metrics that came out of it. That's the story that the CEO wants to hear, because now they can see
ROI.
that operators are finding the resources they need to deliver the product to the quality and other standards that we have. Now they start to see the big picture there.
It helps you change the narrative, right? You're not
It
going in with
absolutely
attendance or
changed.
completion records,
Right.
right? Which your LMS gives you. And by the way, I'm always careful because I don't knock the fact that there are 5 moments and all of them have to get met. And
Yes.
training's spectacular for new and more. But
Yep.
you get into the ROI conversation, gets awful tough if you live
Yes.
in completion as
Yep.
opposed to application. So here's the struggle that folks have. You're changing a narrative here,
Yes.
right? It's going from, outputs
Yep.
to business outcomes.
Yes.
Right. We were I was in the output business. People walk into my office and said, I want 5 days of leadership training.
Yeah.
Okay. There's my marching orders. I'm going to march toward that output, the
Yes.
deliverable.
Yep.
Right. So, in this way that L&D has to shift this conversation, a lot of them say, I don't even know how to talk to the line of business about this. Or when I've tried, they stare at me like just glazed over. So probably not teeing up the narrative right.
Right.
Right? Why do you think this is so hard for Team L&D to do? And what would your recommendation be in the steps to start changing that?
Yeah, it's funny. I was having this conversation with Guy Wallace not too long ago,
Hmm.
and the idea is outputs are controllable, right? I'm going to build a course. I'm going to place it in the LMS, right? That is all under our control. Outcomes are
Yep.
emergent. We are only part of that equation, right? And
Yep.
that becomes the very interesting conversation is that there are a lot of variables involved, as you well know, in the
Hmm.
apply, change, and solve method that have nothing to do with us could
Yep.
completely just disrail anything that we may have done in that regards. And that's the hard conversation is that there's a whole lot of variables in there. So one of the ways that I've talked about it is that, typically we might say, hey, this program's going to improve X in that regards. The conversation then moves to here's how we'll reduce performance variability in the work process. And here's how we'll know if it's working. So I'll give
Hmm.
you a great example of this. I learned this probably about 10 years ago, and it was around the agile methodology that, is software development.
Yep.
And they gave
Yeah.
the scenario of lemonade. And they said, we want to sell more lemonade in the summer. So the first thing we're going to try is we're going to add more ice. If that doesn't work, then we're going to add more lemon to this quantity. If that doesn't work, we'll add a little bit more lemon. If that doesn't work, we're going to add some sugar. And so all these backup plans exist too. We're going to try something. If we don't see it moving quick enough, we've got other plans in backup. And that's where that space is that you're now telling those leaders, I have a plan. I have a thought of something that I'll do, but if it doesn't work, I've got a whole bunch of other things. And if 6 or 7 of these things don't work, we have a different problem on our hand, you know?
Love the metaphor.
Yeah.
Love it. Yeah. And so often we drive towards a waterfall
Yes.
design or a deliverable, and that's kind of the period at the end of the sentence,
Yeah.
right? You're talking about as you journey into apply, solve, and change, having that 5 moments long train, transfer, sustain plan. Yeah, some of those will be misses.
Yeah.
Some that I solve and change.
Yeah.
Embedding learning in the workflow, really misunderstood word in my opinion. I'm a big word guy,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I remember when e-learning came along and it
Yeah.
was JIT. And you're right.
Yeah.
And now we have embedded learning. Well, I don't know if that's how Dr. Gottfredson
Yeah.
in his 5 moments would pivot. So what does it mean to you to embed learning and support in the workflow beyond a course?
For me, and when I think about the 5 moments in Enable, it's validating that the guidance exists where decisions are made. So if I'm
Uh-huh.
building an SOP, if I'm building a job aid, is it in the right place that it
Mm,
needs to be? Do we have standard operating procedures or job aids that are accessible at that moment of execution? Is it in that pipeline where they need it at that moment in the workflow?
mm,
Are the escalation paths clear?
mm.
Do you know what to do if we have a problem and the solution that we've given you is not solving it? And do we have a feedback loop that's visible that we know comes back and says, okay, here's what went wrong. Here's how we fix that the next time, those things. So that's for me is where the embeddedness starts is that you have that all within the system, both human and technology that gives you that answer.
AI.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've heard of it.
Just a little.
But my gosh, here's what I've enjoyed about your posts of late, although I've always enjoyed your work. I think you have one of the more pragmatic views of it,
Yeah.
of people that I've read out there, right? You're kicking the tires, you're balancing the reality of what, taking that thing on means and still
Yeah.
getting our job done, still meeting all 5 moments. I would really appreciate your perspective on the role of AI and realistically how you've attacked it. What have you learned? What
Yeah.
should people be understanding about it out there that
Yeah.
just feel like the tsunami is hit or is about to? And right, and of course they're still probably pulled toward new and more,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
So, give us your journey into that relative to all this.
Yeah, and we tried it, right? So we got out there and we tried, Chat GPT, OpenAI. We tried HeyGen and all the different AIs. We wanted to see what we could actually make happen. One of the first lessons we learned, especially with external AI, and I don't know if you are aware of this, but last year, Microsoft, Salesforce, Slack, and Google said, we're not letting you in the door. Right. And it makes sense to me. You worked at Microsoft. Microsoft's going to let you play long enough that they can figure you out, and then they're going to shut you out because they have Copilot. They want Copilot to be used as an example there, right?
Yep.
So those, and Microsoft obviously being embedded in most workplaces, once they shut that door on external AI, now you've got a hang up problem. Okay, I can't
Yep.
even get in the door with external AI. So what I learned after that is even internal AI, the use of Copilot only has certain levels of access to the internal information. as I kept digging deeper, when I started digging into our systems like CRM and MEP and things like that, you start understanding that those systems were never built for performance metrics in the first place. They were built for the business metrics like productivity and quality and stuff like that.
Right.
It's like, okay, if you can get in the first door, you're probably going to be restricted by IT or HR or legal on the second door. If you manage to get past those, which you probably won't, but even utilizing internal copilot, by the time you get to those systems, you're going to realize nothing's there because the performance architecture is not there. And so that's what I encourage people is before you go full head on to AI, do you have your house in order? Do
Yep.
you do you have something that you could use, whether it may be external or internal, that AI can grab a hold of and say, okay, I see the information. Because that was our challenge is that, when we tried external AI, it couldn't read our internal information. So it couldn't pull anything. It was taking a guess at it, which was fine. Sometimes it would be like, 30% of the information was useful, but you still got to go do the rest of the legwork, which is 70%. So,
So what would you recommend as the first step then? If I'm an L&D professional out there, there's a lot of work in which I'm totally with you that as in the world that we are in and relative to 5 moments, we run AI as a performance tool. And how does it help us in the context of a digital coach,
yeah,
in the nature of the pyramid and such? To your point, there's hurdles there. L&D is also kind of run towards, well, we can help us do our work better.
yeah.
They can help us design quicker,
Hmm.
these kinds of things. Have you experimented in that area at all? Brilliant. Yeah, we're SMEs,
Hmm.
analyzing SharePoint sites, all what used to be the heavy lift
Yeah.
for some still is, but of that can be so empowered by this,
Yes.
right? Methodology begets technology, one of my
Yeah.
favorite quotes, and that's what you're talking about, right? The structure that you bring to the thing and the power that follows it.
Yeah.
And then back to your idea of the roles. And while we started this, I can all of a sudden become a performance architect
Yes.
because I'm not mired in the weeds of an SME or some of the other things. So, friend, let's put a bow around this puppy. It's been remarkable as I knew it would be. So I'm an L&D leader listening out there,
Yeah.
and I want, to take steps towards this besides obviously, reading your wonderful work.
Yeah.
Where, looking back, what are some of the first steps I should do to start eating this elephant? To get to these remarkable roles you described, to get to this area of this being a true business partner with the organization. What a more perfect time to be sitting in, right,
Yeah.
friend? I
It
mean,
is.
we've wanted the seat at the table. We wanted to be seen by the business this way. We've wanted to get all the lift of the burden of the design off our back. I mean, we've wanted the tools to move more into the workflow. It's all those moons are aligning.
Yes.
And we should be not apprehensive, but thrilled,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
But so what do you tell the apprehensive folks out there?
Yeah.
Is there light at the end of the tunnel? Are they going to be okay? We define the what. I, I'm going to stop there.
Yeah.
Could not have summed it up better, friends. So, Joe, thanks so
Of
much for who
course.
you are, all you've done, your willingness to do the posts and the blogs you do. I know you have a day job, but again, folks listening, so insightful. Invite yourself, connect with Joe online, get into his posts. Terrific stuff, Joe. Keep up the great work. Appreciate you. So inspired. Thanks for being here. Well, that's it for this episode of the 5 Moments of Need Performance Matters series. We look forward to future conversations around how to best put the 5 Moments of Need into practice. We welcome your feedback and can be reached on our 5 Moments of Need website, which is www.5momentsofneed.com. We hope you're finding these helpful and will subscribe to future episodes. Have a great day, friends.